distance of the strings at the first fret, that's at the top nut, but also is the issue of your truss rod. Most of you in here have a guitar that has a truss rod in it. And a truss rod, you know, here's actually a broken neck that I took off of a guitar one time. The truss rod is anchored right here in the fingerboard. You can see that the top was broken off of this. And here's the other end. And when it's installed in the guitar, you actually adjust it through the sound hole, and you turn the truss rod, and as you're turning the truss rod, it tightens and it changes the angle of your neck this way, okay? And so you can see on the screen, for example, that there's 3 different basic settings of a truss rod. There's the first one that you see there that's straight. The other one, and this is highly exaggerated. You're never going to see a guitar that has that much action, okay? But it's exaggerated to show you. You can see that this neck bows right here. You see that? Kind of dips. And then here's the exact opposite, is back bow. Now, when you want to check a guitar, the way you do it is you want to position the guitar so that you want to check to see how straight your neck is. You want to position it so that you can look down the ends of the frets as a guide to see how straight your neck is, okay? And you're probably going to have to do it by looking stupid. You're going to close one eye and you're going to set the guitar angle just about what you see right there to look down. And I like to turn it to where light is shining, because depending on where you're standing to the light, I like to get it to where the light is shining right on the ends of the frets, to where they really light up for me, okay? And so, here's what you're looking for. This is a typically pretty straight neck right there. This particular one is a guitar I'm working on right now, and some of the frets are a little bit uneven. But you can see how the fret ends, when you peer down, the neck right here, you can see that the fret ends are all pretty straight, right? And if your guitar looks something like that, you've probably got a pretty good straight neck. That's what a forward bowed neck often looks like. I'd be willing to bet some of you in the room right now have a neck that looks like that as you peer down the fret ends. So don't, suddenly go into palpitations of the heart over that. That's very fixable. That's the most common thing that you find with a truss rod, is that over time, as the guitar has dried out in the fretboard, and that often happens, that it starts to give a little bit, and the neck naturally is following all the tension that's pulling against it, okay? And so that's what a forward bowed neck looks like. There's one that's got just the opposite, and can you guys sort of make out here that as you're looking down the fret ends right here, it's got a bump in it. Do you see that? And then it kind of angles down and gets kind of straight looking here, but it's bowed so that it's bowed that way. That's typically what an over-adjusted neck looks like, and that's usually the result of somebody has tried to adjust the truss rod and they've overdone it. Left to itself, a guitar is not going to get a forward bowed neck like that. It just isn't. That's somebody trying to do an adjustment and doing it poorly. Okay? You can adjust your action by adjusting the truss rod, because as you change the pitch of the neck back here, again, going back to my diagram there, you're changing the angle to the top, right? So the more that you take the head of the guitar down, the more it's going to drop the action on those strings and make it easier to play. And so a lot of people will try to correct action problems with their guitar by trying to do it with their truss rod. And that's okay as long as you do it right. And you don't end up with something like this, because when you have a bowed neck that way, almost guaranteed you're going to have buzzing on the first 3 or 4 frets, and it's going to sound terrible. And people are going to think, I've worn out my frets, or gosh, my guitar's got some big problem, and what do I need to do? And the reality is the truss rod needs to be in proper adjustment. Okay? How do you adjust your truss rod? By the way, here's a different problem. This is actually a distorted neck. Sometimes I've seen people say, oh gosh, I went in, took my guitar in, and somebody said that I've got a bowed neck, my guitar's ruined. And it's like, who did you take it to? And exactly what did they tell you? And the problem of a bad neck on a guitar is never the truss rod adjustment. Now, sometimes the truss rod can get broken. That is a problem. But typically, the worst thing is when you actually have a distorted neck. Can you guys sort of see that neck is kind of twisted? Can you make it out there? It's not a... here's an example of another one. Can you see as you're looking down the neck, you can see that this part of the neck right here dips much more than this part of the neck does. Can you tell that? It's actually twisted between here and here. And typically that can happen on cheaper guitars where they were built before the wood was seasoned properly, and as it dries out, then the neck starts to twist with all the force that's on it. That kind of a problem somebody's going to have to fix for you. But if your truss rod is out of adjustment, that's something that you can do yourself. And you don't need to be afraid to do it. You need to do it carefully, and you need to know what you're doing, but you don't need to be afraid to adjust the truss rod on your own guitar. Some people act as if, oh my gosh, you know, I don't want to destroy this guitar. I don't dare do anything. I must take this to the professional who understands, you know, he's come down from the mountain and he knows exactly, you know, when he touches a guitar, you know, God himself smiles on the work, you know, and it's like, please. Adjusting your truss rod is not a big deal to do as long as you know how to do it. So I want to show you how to do it. Sound good? And there's a couple of different ways that truss rods work. About 90% of the guitars out there, when you look through the sound hole, you see this hole right here? That's where the truss rod is located. And that happens to be the way this particular guitar is set up. And typically you use an Allen wrench, okay? Allen wrenches, you can pick those up at any hardware store. And you insert the Allen wrench into that hole, and you get it to finally fit into the piece that's on top, and you begin making your adjustment. And so, for example, this is what the tech's doing right now. Is he's adjusting. He's got a socket wrench, and probably has an Allen head on that he's stuck in there, and he's using. I would never use a socket wrench to adjust the truss rod. What I like to do is take an Allen wrench like that, and I like to take a socket, and I just fit that socket over it. It gives me a little bit more torque, and I use that to make adjustments. Now, you want to be very careful when you begin adjusting your truss rod, because if it's stiff, you do not want to force that, okay? It's possible that the truss rod has already reached the limit of what it can be adjusted. And if you try to force it, what happens when you try to force a head on a bolt? It snaps off. And when you snap off a truss rod, there is really no solution except that either you got to take the whole fingerboard, this part right here, off the thing, which is a very involved kind of deal, and replace that truss rod out. Sometimes you can actually do a repair with it in the guitar, but it's much harder to do that. So you want to be very careful when you're adjusting. More than likely, if your guitar is bowed forward, okay, more than likely your truss rod is very loose. And as you begin adjusting it, it will begin to tighten up, and as it does, you'll start seeing that neck begin to straighten out. And literally what happens is it starts to curve, and you're adjusting it backwards, okay? Now, and you want to adjust it with the strings on, keep it under tension, and make your adjustment. How do which way do you do? Well, tighty-righty, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Can you guys remember that? Okay? It's just like tightening a typical threaded screw. You turn it to the clockwise position to the right, it tightens it. And when you tighten it, it's going to pull the head of the guitar down, okay? It's going to give it forward bow. If your guitar is bowed up, you want to put forward bow into it to get it to go straight, right? And so you tighten it that way. Most of the time, 99% of the time, when a truss rod's needing to be adjusted, it's needing to be tightened, okay? If you go the opposite way to loosen it, and you know, does it like that. Now, here's other guitars have a plate like this. This happens to be a Taylor guitar, and you take the plate off, and underneath the plate, I'm just curious, how many of you have a plate on the front of the head of the guitar, right there? I'm a couple Taylor people, okay? A lot of guitars don't have those, but some of them, there'll be a plate. A Gibson's going to have one, and so forth. And so you take that plate off to get to adjust the truss rod. And one of the cool things about Taylor is that they've made a cool little tool that typically you get when you buy a Taylor guitar, and it's got a Phillips screwdriver to help you take off those screws, and then it's got the perfect socket that you need to just put it on there and adjust it like you see. Again, tighten it, you go to the right; loosen it, you go to the left. And what I would suggest that you do is just start tightening. If it's your guitar's bowed, start tightening it, but don't tighten more than about 1/8 to 1/4 at most. And then you're going to want to stop, and you're going to want to look at, okay, what kind of progress did I make on that? In fact, sometimes you can even, as you're tightening it, you can even do this and kind of push the direction you want to go, and kind of help the the truss rod a little bit, and then tighten a little bit more and tighten a little bit more. If you find that your truss rod is super tight and you can't even adjust it, then one of the things that I'd suggest that you do is to just take the truss rod and loosen it completely. Okay, just get it as loose as you can possibly get it. In fact, sometimes it's an okay thing that you can, and I've got the wrong size Allen wrench I'd show you here. Sometimes you can actually take this little bolt that's on the end of it completely out and put a little bit of Vaseline in it. A little bit of Vaseline on, there's going to be an edge that's going to rub, put a Vaseline on the edge and put the whole thing back in and tighten it up. And what you can then do is, while it's still loose, is you can go ahead, you need to make sure that either somebody's holding the guitar like this for you, or you can clamp it somehow, and you can actually push the head down, and while you're holding it, tighten up your truss rod, okay? Because that'll actually put that forward bowed thing back in, and now you're tight, okay? Then all you do is adjust it left to loosen it up to let it come back straight. Am I making sense here? You guys all tracking with me? And so, just because you start tightening and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't tighten this at all, and look, there's this bow in it, I need to get rid of my guitar. So well, give it to me. Okay.
Why do you push down on it then?
It's fine for you to push down on it, but you just want to make sure that it's anchored to where when I push down, I'm actually moving the head of the guitar down, the neck of the guitar, and then snug it up. Again, don't do it grill arms. Don't snug it so tight that you're going to break anything, but just get it nice and tight. And what that's going to have done, just to exaggerate it, is you're going to have put the proper kind of tight curve to the neck like that, because you really should be able to get a truss rod angled like that. Everybody ought to be able to do that with their guitar. Then when you tune it back up to pitch, if you've loosened the strings on it, which you're going to want to do if you push it down like I just explained, and then you just loosen it, and by loosening it, you'll get the proper angle back to the truss rod. Does that make sense? You don't need to be afraid to do that. Just be sure that you get an Allen wrench that fits nice and tight. Don't get one that feels like it's almost there, because you may have a millimeter bolt in there and you're using a regular, American standard kind of a thing, and it's not going to fit exactly, and you can strip the head. And so just be sure you've got the right size of Allen wrench to do that, okay? Sometimes the maker has actually put the end of now this one is fine because, the sound hole is about right here, and you can just go in and get it. But sometimes makers have actually put those things so far in that they do not want you to adjust it. And so you're going to need to get a long Allen wrench to go in to be able to do that. Just because they made it that way doesn't mean you shouldn't adjust it. Okay. By the way, when you talk about fixing your own guitar, there's a saying that you need to know that fools tread where angels fear to go. Okay. And what I mean by that is, don't be afraid to do something to your own guitar. Don't think that you're going to break it and it's going to be, you know, destroyed and you're an idiot and you don't have, you know, high school dropouts are doing adjustments on truss rods all the time in factories, okay? So you're smart enough, you're good enough, and by golly, people like you, and so you can fix your own guitar, so just don't be afraid to do that, all right?
Is that truss rod the whole length of the guitar?
It's only, well, it depends on how yours is set up. It's typically runs just the length of the neck itself. And yeah. And some guitars don't even have them. There's some classical guitars that don't, because classical guitars have a lighter tension to them and they don't pull enough that sometimes the builder builds them, you know, without it. Martin guitars never used truss rods until about 1981 or 82, something like that. And so some of the older Martins, this happens to be a Martin from 1976, and there's no truss rod in it. And so, you know, what they put in there to hold the neck straight, you're pretty much, you know, set to that. And so just because a guitar is you know, is a nicer guitar doesn't mean that it's going to have a truss rod in it, you know. So, but typically now they do, because it's just so critical to helping you with a whole deal of action. Okay.
What's the size of that Allen?
I don't know.
Or do they vary?
They vary.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And so I use different ones. I mark it in blue because I know which one works with the Martins. There's not a standard size of Allen wrench, so you're going to need to, you know, just get a set of them. I have a bag of them with different sizes, and so you know, I just use, you know, whatever works. And they don't use the ones that you access from the top. You're going to use a socket or you know, a wrench that's built. They vary, and so it just depends. Okay. All right.